Yo, I'm here. So, I would like to make a in-depth explanation of everything that's changed with Glad and other changes that will affect Glad and how it'll all combine together. So, I decided to make it in the format of something like a Q&A, where I came up with the questions that I myself would like to have answered and possibly other people would. And maybe there aren't as many detailed questions here. So if you would like to have my opinion on some of those things, as a person who's been playing Bleed for like, what, 4 years, then go to comments and type it there. I will read them all and answer all of them. At least I'll try to. Okay, so let's begin. The main question that bothered me was, is Bleed Bow dead? Well, it's kind of more or less the same if we don't consider weapon quality changes. And you might ask, like, what? Didn't they buff Split and Arrow and Puncture? And well, the buffs are more of a compensation for lost flat damage because those skills were too reliant on it. And your damage will plus minus stay the same, so the only buff you get is like Glad changes or weapon quality changes. And weapon quality changes are like what? From 10 to 20% more damage for Bleed Bow. Basically, it's not too big. So Bleed Bow is still dog shit for campaign. It's still shit to gear with, and it still has an issue with having sometimes too little damage. But the good thing for Bleed Bow is that aggravation node helps it big time, because when you play Bleed Bow and you get to endgame setup, you need haste, right? And you need other stuff. And the problem is that you run out of sockets because you need like Ensnaring Arrow, Mirage Archer, or Ensnaring Arrow and like Totem support. So now you have 2 more support gems, so the pressure is off, which is really nice. So you have to give up Blood Rage and have to give up War Banner, stuff like that. So quite good. Next question is dual wield always better than one-handed with shield? No, because from what I'm seeing, going dual wield becomes better only when you get 2 good weapons that you want, like Vernastra and a good axe, right? Well, at the earlier stages of the game, one-handed plus shield is better due to easier gearing and more straightforward and not passive skill dependent defenses provided by the shield.
Yo, hello from editing stage. I forgot to mention another advantage of using one-handed weapon with a shield is that there's a retaliation skill which is like some absurd amount of damage and that requires you to use a shield. And even though it has this like multiplier of, not multiplier, but 30% less damage with ailments, I still think that at level 20 it can have some massive damage.
So this one is quite simple and straightforward. Dual wield is better late game. One-handed and shield is better early game, but it doesn't mean that you cannot do something with them vice versa, with like dual wield early game and shield late game. But for like pure efficiency wise, I think what I said is true. How is Bleed leveling now? Well, it's way better. Like, of course, Thunder is still the Bleed king for leveling, but Lacerate can become strong at Act 6 and 7 once you get enough attack speed compared to previous like white and yellow maps, which was like the place where you would usually respec to Lacerate to feel fine compared to Thunder. Now, I still do think that if you want to deal the most damage, you still need to go Sunder till the same point, but if you're a Lacerate enjoyer, you can swap earlier, both because you get bleed pops earlier, and Lacerate kind of struggles with clear, and because dual wielding favors Lacerate more than any other bleed skill you could use. And dual wielding is kind of satisfying both because of the attack speed and because of the block, even though block in campaign doesn't really matter. But you also can get the inherent bonuses doubling as your Cruel Lab. And in my opinion, it feels really nice when you can get upgrades for 2 of your weapons instead of 1 weapon, because sometimes you could find like a 2-handed axe, which is almost better than yours, but it's just not worth it because of the sockets. Now the gearing process might be more satisfying, I think. So Bleed leveling is better, except for Bleed Bow. Bleed Bow is still dog shit. Don't level it if you want a smooth experience. Unless, of course, you're not rushing, that is. what skills for bleed you have to be on a lookout for. So what I mean here is that there are skills that can be good for bleed that people might not instantly think of. So those unorthodox skills, so to speak, are Sunder, Sweep, Blade Storm, EQ, and Bone Shatter. So Sunder and Bone Shatter, or like Blade Storm, are kind of obvious. Not obvious, but semi-obvious because people have heard of them in some formal way, right? Sweep has insane base damage, and previously you could already play Sweep. It's just that its damage didn't exceed Sunder, and I think it still doesn't. You know what? Let me actually check. Sunder 6 to 9. Yeah, Sweep does not exceed Sunder, so maybe saying that Sweep is good is an over-exaggeration. But for clear, it totally might be better. It's gonna be like a Cyclone type clearing skill where you just jump in, you one-shot all the mobs, they just pop, and you go next. Well, with Sunder, it's straight line based clearing strategy, kind of makes it sometimes not as good. So it's gonna be more like single target damage versus clear with Sweep versus Sunder. So Sunder with Warcries might be good because your waves can overstack a bleed, especially if you play something like Crimson Dance. And I do think that if you play Sunder, you do need to play Crimson Dance. With Sweep or EQ, you probably want to play Aggravation. And with Bone Shatter, especially with the Bone Shatter of Complexity, you probably also want to play Aggravation. Because Bone Shatter has this problem where you have to both take care of the Crimson Dance stacks and Bone Shatter stacks. And since those don't really align, I do think that Crimson Dance should be dropped on any Bone Shatter bleed builds. Blade Storm is quite straightforward. It's similar to Lacerate, and it didn't get as big of a buffs as Lacerate. Let me even look up to like, yeah. So its damage got almost doubled. Well, yeah. The problem, of course, is that Blade Storm is very melee skill, especially when you're trying to deal single target damage. So that is a problem. But it has very satisfying like playstyle of run and go, where you can just make a Blade Storm and it'll hit enemies and they will die on their own. Which I personally don't like, but Blade Storm is playable as a bleed skill, just like Lacerate, just that it deals a bit less damage than Lacerate. And it also doesn't have this like efficient overstacking thing where Blade Storms that you spawn, they deal 50% less damage with its and ailments, while Lacerate second hit doesn't. So Blade Storm is more of a clearing bleed skill, and Lacerate is more of a single target clear skill, but I will come back to Lacerate tech later. So, which skills are mechanically superior for bleed application? Well, it's going to be pretty simple. Lacerate, because it hits twice. EQ, well, me strong, me bum, me apply bleed, enemy die, I mean, whatever. Sunder, because you can apply multiple bleeds, both in the pack and against the boss, especially if you scale AoE a lot. And maybe Puncture and Snipe. The reason I say maybe is because whether or not you think that Puncture and Snipe is mechanically superior way to apply bleed depends purely on your perspective, right? Some people like channeling it and feel this mechanic as rewarding. Some people just hate it and they would rather not touch it ever. So, unique items that are potentially insane. I think that there are more unique items that I overlooked, but from what I could think of when I was writing the script, it's Varnastra, of course, because of the node for Glad, and it also can help you get that critical strike chance and accuracy for rupturing a support gem, which I'll talk about later, of course. Soul Taker, because it's a high DPS axe with very neat bonuses for your defenses. Ungil's Harmony, that is again for rupturing a support gem, so that you can more consistently apply rupturing. And Rigwald Savagery, it's a sword that grants you bleed damage over time multiplier per rage that you have. Previously it gave 1% for one rage, Now it gives 2% per 1 rage. So by default, it's a buff by like what? I think 10%. So it's not that much better. And the problem, of course, is that there's no range interaction with bleed anymore at all, because it now affects attack damage only. It doesn't affect movement, not movement speed, attack speed. Because previously, even though you were bleed build and you didn't benefit from attack damage increases, you would still benefit from attack speed increases. Now you do not benefit from that at all. So Rework Savagery might be worth it only in some kind of abomination of a mix of bleed impale something, or it might not be worth at all. I'm not sure. I still need to cook. I'm still gonna be thinking about it and stuff like that. Next, Aggravating versus Crimson Dance. Well, dual wield is always Crimson Dance due to insane attack speed that you gain from the inherited bonuses and other nodes. And I think that Crimson Dance is gonna go on the second plan. I don't know how to say it. It's gonna get to the background basically. It's not gonna be as mainstream anymore. So anything else that isn't dual wielding goes aggravating. So bleed bow, EQ, two-handed weapons, one-handed and shield. What was it? Bone shatter. You know, all that stuff goes aggravating. Like no discussion. Something like Sunder with multi-strike and Ruthless might be insanely aggravating, because Sunder has like this insane percentage multiplier of your fizz, and with multi-strike and Ruthless you can get some insane, especially with Rislata, right? You can get some insane combos where you do a third strike with multi-strike and Ruthless, and they combine, and then you get a high roll on Rislata, and then that one thing applies as aggravating. And then you don't have to get fucked by the Crimson Dance being like, oh, now do it 8 times, you know? So yeah, aggravating might be really good for something like that, because aggravating will be both insane for clear and for single target with the thing I just explained if you use multi-strike and Ruthless. The only problem, of course, is leveling phase, where you don't really have a consistent way of applying aggravating, but once you get the mastery for aggravation, or you get Vuln to get more chance, or you get the Cruel Lab, but which is unreliable in early stages. Unreliable, you shouldn't be like, oh, I will get my damage once to get to Cruel Lab. You shouldn't be thinking that. Then this becomes a viable playstyle. So what are the build archetypes that can be played as a Glad now? Well, you can basically play anything now. You can play dual wield melee. You can play one-handed shield with one-handed plus shield with melee. You can play one-handed with shield caster. I'm not a caster player. I don't really have much to cook there, but I really hope that someone's gonna cook up some unkillable machine of death with SRS. I don't know, because the node for 100% more damage with 1% each second against rares and bosses. I feel like that node is insane for Ubers. Or just bosses in general, like Maven, Elder, etc, etc. The only thing I worry is that Gladiator as a caster might be too niche of a thing, where it'll only work with something like retaliation abuses, because Guardian, in my opinion, still deals way too much damage for Glad to even compete in that case with summoning, and they're way better casting caster ascendancies than Glad. So maybe Glad is going to be only a retaliation caster. So next archetype is two-handed melee. That's quite obvious. It's mostly for Bone Shatter, which I'm not sure though, because it is possible Bone Shatter is better with one-handed axe plus shield. And of course, EQ or Sunder with two-handed melee is really good. And the classic Bleed Bow. Not much to say there. Possible problems with Glad rework. I haven't thought of many yet, but I do think that there are a few problems in my opinion. So one is Bleed Bow was obviously overlooked, but since you go for champ in late game anyway, it's possibly that the problems with this aren't as big, right? But still, being a 3-point ascendancy just like we used to, it just means that, well, every bleed build got buffed into the sky. Bleed Bow is just like you used to. Deserved. I'm not saying it's bad. Bleed bow was the only actually playable bleed build for too long of a time, so that is fine. Next problem is the ascendancy point. Look it up. War of attrition. Deal 1% more damage with his damage. Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean. That node is too unreliable in my opinion for damage. Like, how many seconds realistically are gonna spend against the boss? 5? Maybe 10? I can understand it against like pinnacle bosses, but you would usually not use it except for some like, I don't know, uber essence, you know. But yeah. Also, it depends on what the presence mean, but as far as I know, the presence radius is even more than your screen if you have 1920 to 1080. So it might not be as bad for something like Expedition or Blight, even if you find a way to stay close to rare or unique monsters. Yeah, I don't know. For problems, that's it, but I think there are a few more problems that I haven't thought of. Oh, right. The shield not being favored for using Glad if you're going for Determined Survivor and More Than Skill nodes. So, I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just that it incentivizes people to not play shield specifically because shield is an obvious choice, and if Determined Survivor didn't nerf your shield chance to block, then people would only go shields, but now you're more incentivized to go dual wielding, both because of the inherent bonuses doubled and because of the shields not being as good. So yeah. Glad as a caster. So new retaliation thing, as I said previously, is and the ability to like deal twice the damage with his elements when fighting rares or uniques is like very versatile. And like to all of that, who wouldn't like some block except for like bow? So it's like very general like number things except for retaliation. And again, I'm not a caster player. I don't know how to build those things. I don't know what to do with those things. And I do think that there's some place to cook. I'm just not sure in what direction. So what would be the possible setups that would work the best? Dual wielding is obviously the strongest setup simply because of the ease of access to block and sheer attack speed you get from both nodes and the ascendancy node, which doubles the inherent effects. Dual wield setups could include 2 strong axes, Vernastra plus strong axe, Vernastra plus Rework Savagery plus Bloodthirst on low life, and last but not least Rework Savagery plus strong axe. So to explain a bit, 2 strong axes, it's to maximize the effect of the ascendancy node, which gives you more damage with these elements against enemies that are on low life while you're wielding an axe. It'll be 60%, which means you'll deal, in general, 30% more damage. Right? It's almost like having punishment at all times. No, wait, it's twice as strong as having punishment, right? Punishment, okay, it's just like having punishment. Even though punishment gets to like, yeah, it's like having punishment. And so, Vernastra for Strong Axe is more about rupturing, but also dealing the same damage with your second axe. Because Vernastra doesn't have really good base numbers, while Strong Axe will be able to compensate for that. And you also have something like Seajack, so it'll be like really fast, because as far as I know, Vernastra is not the fastest axe you can have. And so that I don't lie, right? Let me actually just check. Vernastra. Yeah, it doesn't have attack speed, and its attack speed is 1.3 compared to like Seajax, which is 1.5. So yeah, it's not ideal attack speed wise. And for those of you who wonder why attack speed is important, because when you play Crimson Dance, overstacking is a really important part of like optimizing your single target damage. So the more attack speed you have, the higher the value of overstacking will be. Thus, you'll get better bleeds, because in bleed, and like ignite as well, only your strongest bleed or ignite apply. So whenever you have, let's say, 8 shit bleeds, your next bleeds that are better than those will replace them, and you'll start dealing more damage. So the next setup is Vernastra plus Legworld Savagery plus Bloodthirst on low life. The idea here is that Vernastra and Rigworld Savagery have low numbers on the axes themselves, but Bloodthirst can provide you with enough flat to compensate for that if you're on low life. There's of course some petrified blood and stuff like that. It also might get some life stacking stuff, so it might be something like, hello guys, welcome to my build guide to life stacking Gladiator, Lazarate, Varnastra, Ligwood Savagery, Dual Strike of Bleeding. Sub and like and subscribe, you know, stuff like that. And last, Regal Savagery and Strong Axe. The idea, of course, is that you get a lot of flat, and then you multiply that by having Rage, which I'm still not sure about with the problems that I mentioned previously about Rage, so yeah. So next one is Bleed Bow. Like, not much to explain. It got buffed a little bit there and here. And most importantly though, the issues of enemies sometimes not being affected by Ensnaring Arrow, or being like stationary, is fixed by the Ascendancy node. So, log the fuck in. I'm not good at casters, so I will let others cook. I've said it like 2 times and I said it a third time. But something like dual wield wands might be insane. Like if I had to like come up with something from the top of my head, right? 200 weapons. Oh wait, also Rage convert helmet. Like Rage, dual wield wands, Gladiator, login guys. Okay, so 200 weapons are valid only if you're going for aggravated build with slow or semi-slow attacks like EQ, Sunder, Sweep. But you'd also lose on a lot of survivability, so it's questionable on Glad specifically in my opinion. It might be better on someone else. So 100 plus shield is a very straight up setup, but you do lose the defensive ascendancy point due to 1 point of them cutting your log from shield you have. But you do become able to get the unique thingies from your shield, like Shaper Armor, the Reckoning Shield, etc. Last question is, you know, kinda maybe too ambitious. Is Glad objectively an A or even an S tier ascendancy now? Well, it's kind of hard to say, but from what I'm seeing, they have made Gladiator into a very flexible endurance fighter, no matter the build you pick, thus making it more resilient both during the mapping and especially bossing. If we consider all the buffs to Lazarate, Split Arrow, Puncture, EQ, Aggravate, Rupture, etc, etc, then I can confidently say that the Gladiator is fucking back, baby. But I mean, it's totally an A tier, and possibly even an S tier, but only the time will tell. As well as, the only issue with it being S tier is that Slayer, Juggernaut, and Champion still exist. So maybe there's gonna be some competition, finally. Woo! I also want to say that I've been thinking about making a Bleed build tier list for a long while, but since like the only playable one was Bleed Bow, there was really no reason. But now, boy oh boy, we have a lot to choose from. From classic Bleed Lacerate or EQ to Bleed Bow and Bleed Flicker. Ew. Why did I even write that? Okay, so I will not promise anything, but I will try my damn best to make the most detailed guides, guide on all Bleed builds, their stats, pros and cons, gearing, leveling, and all that. Also, it might be about time I become a competitive player and start participating in races, because I fucking finally don't have to play those cringe ascendancies, which aren't redshirted and don't use Bleed as a main source damage. Holy fuck, thank you Chris, thank you Mark. Oh my god. Okay, it's time, my friends. The happiest day of my Bleed Glad career has arrived. That's all I have. Make sure to leave any questions you have in the comments, and like, you know, I'll be there, I'll be answering them. So yeah, thanks for bleeding. If you lacerated this video, make sure to rupture the like button, leave an aggravation down below, and bleed pop to my channel while you're at it. Until next time, bye.